So our next speaker is Dr. Tikva Blaukopf Schein, and she will be presenting her research titled The Representation of the Greek Mythological Divine on the Modern Yiddish Stage. Tikva Blaukopf Schein earned her doctorate in a comparative study of threatening laughter in classical and ancient Jewish literature at the University of Bar-Ilan. Her other degrees, BA and Honorary MA, are from the University of Oxford, where she studied Classics and Oriental Studies. She currently is engaged in a post-doctorate at Bar-Ilan University and is part of the faculty at Shalem College. Her research surrounds the areas of threat, belonging, and non-verbal speech acts in both classical and Jewish studies. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's a privilege to be here tonight and to be part of Malta's thriving and developing classical department. It's really enjoyable. Thank you so much. So my talk tonight is on the reception of the Greco-Roman mythological divine on the Yiddish stage. I'm going to share my screen and we'll start off. In particular, I'm going to be looking at Mendl Elkin's play, The Sorrows of Oedipus. So let's see, we'll start here. Okay, that'll do. In Mendl Elkin's 1935 production of The Sorrows of Oedipus, of Sophocles' 429 BC Oedipus, the gods are all but expunged from the text. In Elkin's reception of the Sophoclean myth, the 2 millennia-old content is massaged into acceptance for the religious norms of the American immigrant Yiddish-speaking audience. So I was particularly interested in Jeremy's talk just now about merging together philosophy and religion and what that does for the audience. The Greek chorus is transformed into the figure of a priest alone. Mentions of Greek divinities are elided into the most minimal mentions of Apollo. And the descriptions we do have of Apollo himself are adapted to the liturgical biblical frame of reference to which Elkin's audience were more familiar, more comfortable and less opposed. So in this paper, I'm looking to investigate the reception of this Greco-Roman divine in Elkin's Die Leiden von Oedipus, The Sorrows of Oedipus, his play itself. And by exploring the position of Apollo, the sole divinity to remain in Elkin's work, this paper is seeking to situate Elkin's theatrical tragedy within the history of Yiddish theatre and its socio-religious need to both challenge and to protect its audience. I'm looking at the selective reception of Greco-Roman divinities in Yiddish theatre in general and the artifice itself in Elkin's play, considering both as forms of a daring literary avant-garde movement. And this exploration is aiming to provide a probing perspective into the reception of Greco-Roman mythology in Yiddish theatre and raising questions regarding what does it mean when we emphasize the dramaturgical representation of deities? What does it mean when we put red lines towards what theatre draws for itself? And the function in general of Greco-Roman mythology in the context of Enlightenment. And moreover, this paper is wishing to offer itself as a launchpad for discussions of immigrant adaptability, literary conformity, and minority acceptance. What happens when a community uses texts from its absorbing culture to reflect on its own position? So this paper starts with a textual examination of Elkin's play, highlighting the key extraordinary differences from the original, which we've spoke about just in brief at the beginning. And then it continues to discuss a brief history of Yiddish theatre, contextualizing what's going on with Elkin's Oedipus, its connection to the Greco-Roman mythology, and how Yiddish theatre itself as a movement navigated the balance between Greek versus Jewish, or as Tertullian puts it, Athens versus Jerusalem. So let's start off with Elkin. Who was he, and in what context was he writing? So he lived from 1873 to 1961, and from the YIVO, which is the Yiddish-speaking cultural archives, they describe him as an actor, theatre director, journalist, writer, and he was indeed the first chief librarian. As you can see, he served there until 1938. He was born in Belarusia, and he left in 1920 for Poland, where he then was always engaged in theatrical works. setting up camps for children to engage in theatre and he produced his own plays at these camps for children to act out, and he emigrated to the United States in 1923. So his life was one of an immigrant, and his life was one of theatre itself. He was heavily involved in Yiddish theatre and heavily involved in taking the classics of the time, generally mediated through the language of Russian and French, and translating them into Yiddish for a Yiddish-speaking audience. So as we discuss this, I invite any listeners to this talk who are interested in adaptations of the Greco-Roman plays, Greco-Roman literature, to think about how it's changed when it's a minority group which is doing it. What does it mean? We speak a lot about colonization, decolonializing. What does it mean for the Yiddish theatre movement to be translating Greco-Roman plays? How is it taken on as an act of power itself? So this work does take into consideration the socio-historical, anthropological, and psychological elements which are involved in considering the concerns of any immigrant group. And moreover, it considers domination, sense of security, and the risk of literary oppression that's involved in filtering down Greco-Roman mythological works, and what it does to blot out or to censor different aspects of it for the comfort of the audience. Let's talk now about The Sorrows of Oedipus, fantastic play. So Elkin's one-act performance of Oedipus it's one act only, despite its trimmed down size, largely, even though I said otherwise at the beginning, faithful to the Sophoclean text. So Elkin is likely to have had at hand Chernikovsky's 1929 translation into Hebrew, in fact, of Oedipus itself. While maintaining a more colloquial tone than Sophocles' own high poetry, Elkin's characters follow the same plot line as Sophocles' and end up at the same point. And Elkin's work is just as much a tragedy as Sophocles is. And for the same reasons, Oedipus's hamartia, the peripeteia, it has the tragic elements. But the key differences that exist render Elkin's work more palatable for his audience. For Kaplan, who writes in 2010, the main difference is the shift in the maternal nature of Jocasta. While fascinating, that's not the focus of this paper. The focus here is the most prominent, which I see it to be, which is the expunging of the divine itself. So whereas Sophocles' Oedipus includes reference to the pantheon of the Greek gods, Athena, Artemis, Dionysus, and Apollo, they're all referenced in the chorus's first speech. In Elkin's Oedipus, only Apollo is referenced. Apollo becomes the catch-all for all that is divine in Elkin's work. And this minimalizing of exposure to the Greek divine signals a deep discomfort of Yiddish theatre with this aspect of Greek mythology and the workaround it's created in order to maintain comfort. In addition to the expunging of the divine, the chorus, like I said, is got away with. While the function of the chorus, as we know, is in Greek tragedy is a linchpin to its theatrical success, Elkin uses it just the once at the end of the play. Instead of a chorus providing an intermediary agency between the audience and the protagonists, mediating the moral dilemmas faced on stage, Elkin thrusts the audience into the world of action without reprieve. So one must question what Elkin desired in this expunging of the choral mediator and moral guide. When in Sophocles the chorus offer warnings aplenty in their first ode, in Elkin it's just the priest who's the mouthpiece. Now, I could have brought it, but it was in Yiddish itself, so I'd be translating it anyway, so I'm giving you a précis here. Only at the beginning and at the end of the play does a chorus appear. Its message stripped of the moralistic alarm inherent to the Sophoclean message. What does it mean for a Sophoclean play to be bereaved of its chorus? So I'm raising the question here and offering an answer perhaps of autonomy and self-guidance. The play adapts itself to the needs of its audience, and seemingly the presence of the audience is antagonistic to the sense of independence that this Yiddish-speaking audience needs to feel in the face of the Greco-Roman past. At the coda of the play, Elkin's message is brief and cheerily divinity-free. Let me find it for you on the PowerPoint here. Here we go. It's right at the end. Sophocles said, the Sophocles version is, citizens of Thebes, look, it's Oedipus who passes here, he who read the riddle of death, and who stood as the mightiest of mortal men. Fortune loved him, and those who saw him turned and looked to him again. Behold, he's fallen. Great storms and the outreaching sea surround him. Therefore, O man, beware. Look towards the end of things that be, the last of all visions, the last of days. Do not consider any man's life as profit. Here ends the full tale. May the darkness painlessly find him. Okay, this should be familiar enough, but Elkin, on the other hand, with a concisiveness that really is quite impressive, says, a praise to you from the people in the country. Blessed be your father's hand. We come to you with blessings. May your threshold and door be blessed. So it's a very different tone. We still have this understanding of it being a tragedy, but the role of the chorus is very different. Now, why would that be? One can look to the questions of perhaps a dearth of Yiddish-speaking actors. This was not the case. Ease in reproducing lines on stage where other plays are longer. Now, this is only a one-act play, so perhaps that could be the case. Or lack of patience from the audience themselves to sit through a longer play. Now, these are just suppositions. It hardly seems likely, given what else the audience is known to have sat through. You know, translations of Ibsen and Shakespeare does not point to them being impatient. These edits appear as deliberate dramaturgical choices. Furthermore, Elkin's final chorus bears no resemblance to the solemn piety. The virtue of Elkin's chorus lies in its humanism. Elkin has not translated here a Greco-Roman pantheon into monotheism. He's obliterated it altogether. The Greek chorus, as we know, is by nature religious. Its composition in Greek tragedy is that of God-fearing individuals who stand on a higher moral ground than that of the protagonists. Thereby, they're able to offer moral advice, worth listening to at least. In disposing of the chorus, Elkin transforms the quality of the play into one far less imbued by ancient Greek religious ritual and more relatable to those who are either non-religious or of a different religion, both of which apply to the Yiddish-speaking audience. The Greek pantheon is minimized in the chorus as well as in the rest of the play. At the start of the play, Elkin's chorus appears very briefly to sing the praises of Apollo, while in Sophocles, lines 182 to 248, you have all these gods that I mentioned before, Zeus, Athena, Artemis, Ares, and Dionysus, and they're all beseeched together. But in Elkin, like I said, it's just Grosser Apollo, magnificent Apollo, who is entreated twice. Apollo takes the place of these other gods. The general religious ambiance of Elkin's play is reduced. All of it. The play commences with characters which don't even appear in Sophocles' version. You have the first woman and the second woman who take lines which were otherwise allotted to Sophocles' priest. And this diminishment goes hand in hand with the liturgical touch which Elkin endows to the characters' words. So when the chorus does beseech Apollo, they do so as if they'd walked out the biblical text of Exodus. They say, accept our request, extend your arm to us with kindness. So this outstretched hand, mimicking the qualities of the Jewish omniscient divine, Apollo is granted this anthropomorphic appeal, which is repeated many times in the Bible, wherein the Jewish God is referred to as having saved the Jews from Egypt with this outstretched hand. He's lent the omnipotence of the biblical God in the miraculous salvation from slavery. So this is a trope which is familiar to the Yiddish-speaking audience. Together with this, Elkin all but obliterates the Sophoclean oracle, instead transposing God. Sophocles' crayon relates how Laius set out to consult an oracle and never returned home again. Elkin reformulates this to a religious experience almost trite, to that of a failed sense of penitence, finding one's way back to oneself and to God. Quote, he got lost on the way to God and never returned. Elkin thereby creates what Kaplan calls, quote, an alternate theology closely aligned with monotheistic values. So you can have your cake and eat it. So these examples are neither isolated nor surprising. There are other plays, it's Medea, Elkin's Medea. But this paper posits that they are so unsurprising consequence of the socio-historical settings of Yiddish theatre itself. So I'm going to give you a brief history of Yiddish theatre itself. Let's see here. There we go. do not mention the names of the ancient gods that the Greeks and Romans referred to in their poems and ethics, and to which all the European poets of our times are drawn, for Jacob supped not of things like these. And this is a quotation from the German Hebraist Naphtali Herz-Vesely to his fellow Yiddish-speaking literati in the 18th century, a full century before the events described in this paper. So Yiddish theatre has this rich history tracing back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And its comfort with Greco-Roman, or discomfort with Greco-Roman divinities, is well attested according to the sentiments here by Herz-Vesely. So it began, the beginnings of Yiddish theatre were in Purim Spielen, which I've given you on the presentation here, the PowerPoint, which are theatrical productions arranged for performance on the Jewish festival of Purim, which is a festival of the carnivalesque. So prohibited for engaging in theatrical performances regularly, and indeed after 1883 there was a ban in Russia on Yiddish theatre itself, Purim offered an opportunity for the profane to enter into the world of the otherwise holy Jewish people. So there was an adjuring against engaging in theatre according to the religious principles of the time also. Performed initially only in the courtyards to the synagogues, therefore getting the imprimatur of the religious establishment, these Purim Spielen form the backbone of Yiddish theatre's Urf story. It originally emerged in Eastern Europe as a form of cultural expression for the Jewish communities that were excluded from mainstream European theatre, either because of anti-Semitism or because of religious reasons. Then budding in Romania, flourishing in Russia, and indeed it did flourish in Russia until 1883, when there was kind of a forced exodus to either Romania or London, Western Europe, Poland, New York, wherever Jews went. And the language of Yiddish was used as a means of uniting Jewish communities and preserving Jewish culture, while also providing an avenue for social commentary and political critique, as theatre always is. As Jewish communities began to migrate to new countries, they brought Yiddish theatre with them. And in fact, actually, London's first professional Yiddish theatre opened in 1884. It lasted until the mid-1930s, when most of them were shut down because of the war. And in America, Yiddish theatre thrived until the earlier 20th century, with productions constantly being produced in New York City. And these productions were popular, and they were even attended by non-Jews who were keen to learn about what was going on. In 1930, of course, Yiddish theatre in Western Europe fell out of favor, political situation, the rise of Nazi Germany, and the persecution of anything Jewish, and struggling to maintain their cultural identity in their places of refuge, in the countries that we've named. The Jewish population tried to maintain this otherwise flourishing art. And it became from this wonderful theatrical scene in Europe, it became a highly endangered one in their places of refuge. And it's in the context of this threat on the horizon that Elkin produced his play in New York. Now, as to the quality of it and what was going on, so the scholar Stephens, who was writing at the turn of the 20th century, said that Yiddish theatre held itself to a standard far above its English counterparts. So playing translations or adaptations of Western classics like Tolstoy, Shaw, Ibsen, when English theatre wasn't even doing it itself. And there was this one-way exchange from the Yiddish stage to Broadway, as in they wouldn't go from Broadway back to the Yiddish stage, but they'd start off on the Yiddish stage itself. And they had no qualms about producing what they called themselves Schund, which means junk art. It didn't need to be of the best quality. Try it out, see how it goes. But it also had part of its raison d'etre of showcasing high quality material, a motivation that had its roots in the Jewish Enlightenment, and which played out its tensions in its attraction to, yet repulsion from, these Greco-Roman pieces of literature. The Jewish Enlightenment, or Haskalah as it's known, was a movement that began in the 18th century and aimed to modernize Jewish history, Jewish society, by bringing it closer to European Enlightenment ideas. It encouraged Jewish people to engage with secular culture and to seek knowledge outside of religious texts. And the inclusion of Greek mythology stands as a most clear example of this effort to include secularism. And as part of this movement, Yiddish theatre emerged as a powerful tool for expressing Jewish identity and culture. And one of the ways in which the Haskalah influenced Yiddish theatre was by promoting the use of literary texts and the adoption of more modern forms of performance. With the rise of the Haskalah, more writers and intellectuals began to contribute to the development of Yiddish theatre, addressing contemporary issues or political problems. There were many theatre groups that I've mentioned here, scattered around. Shalem Aleichem is one particular theatrical figure who you may have heard of, associated with the Jewish Enlightenment and Yiddish theatre, very popular. There's also Avram Goldfaden, Jacob Gordon, who adapted King Lear, many adaptations who are trying to, quote, bridge the binary opposition between Jewish and Western cultures. And Yiddish theatre stood as the bridge for that. And it's in this context that Elkin is producing his Oedipus. So Yiddish theatre differs significantly from the other types of theatre in terms of religious themes. While other theatre forms are primarily focusing on secular themes, Yiddish theatre often incorporates by choice religious motifs and cultural traditions deeply rooted in Jewish culture, even if it's not in the center of its community. It's providing a crucial role in preserving and advancing Jewish culture amongst the minority and immigrant community. But yet, there is this anathema towards including the Greco-Roman mythological divine on the Yiddish stage. Theatre, comedy, and anything Greek come together as this triumvirate of threatening evil towards the rabbinic overseers of the Jewish world. At the time of the Talmud, which, we're straddling two millennia between Sophocles' Oedipus and Elkin's, but let's go back a little bit, and you've got the 4th to 6th century CE, the time of the Talmud, the Jewish texts, which talks about why not to attend Greek performances or why not to attend theatre. And here, let me give you this. In one of the tractates, one of the books of the Talmud, it talks about why you should not engage in it. Don't go to a theatre because that's a place for idol worship. And this is a theme, this is an attitude which really continued for many centuries and at the time of Yiddish theatre itself. And this premise of being able to engage in theatrical activity is an affront to the rabbinic, to the Jewish mindset of that time and of the time of Yiddish theatre itself. So how did they work around this problem of Greek mythology? So there's a nice scene let me give you this. Let's skip ahead. Here we are. There's a nice scene in one particular play which has two protagonists. Sorry, this is I Peretz. It's actually a literary form not to be performed, of Venus and Shulamis. So you have the Greco-Roman Venus pitted against Shulamis, who is the eponymous Jewish mythological figure of the Song of Songs, who is left unnamed. And there's a discussion between two men as to who is the most beautiful. The one doesn't even know who Venus is. There's a symbol of the unenlightened Jew, the one who doesn't have access to secular culture. And he has it explained to him, to which he retorts this quotation that you have here: enough, I'm absolutely sick. This you call a goddess? So you have this repugnance towards the Greco-Roman divine as expressed by the perhaps uneducated, uncultured Jew, or indeed the one who is steeped in Jewish mythological culture and religion, but who isn't ready to accept and to grapple with the Yiddish-speaking theatre and the stage itself. So there are many different types of themes and Greek mythological figures that come out, which I can't express now through lack of time. What I do want to tell you is that we do have a lot of rise of nationalism in Yiddish theatre, and Apollo comes as a symbol of enlightenment and progress. So why is it Apollo who is the only figure who is kept in Elkin's Oedipus? It's not just by chance. He himself embodies the ideals of modernity and cultural assimilation. And he was a figurehead, Apollo himself, for this enlightenment movement of the Jewish Enlightenment, an incorporation of the lofty poetry and a symbolic mascot of the Romantic movement. And he was a safe address for the Yiddish playwrights who were searching for a figure who could anchor them in the Western classics without perjuring them to the rabbinic prohibitions against such theatrical idolatry. Moreover, Apollo was painted as a Jewish mensch, so to speak, frequently portrayed as a hero who helped Jewish characters overcome their old-fashioned traditions and embrace a more secular and European way of life. It was a transitional aid to navigating both the literary worlds of Enlightened literature and the Yiddish junk art, Shunt, which was otherwise so popular. He was a mediator between the Haskalah and the traditional modes of being. He was less focused on his divine powers and more on his humanistic ideals. And in that sense, Elkin's representation of Apollo does differ from the Greco-Roman representation, because here he's a symbol of the transformative power of education and culture, inspiring audiences to embrace change and modernity. So in that respect, Elkin, by transforming Apollo from a distant god to a more relatable humanistic figure, Yiddish theatre is helping to connect Jewish audiences with the broader cultural and intellectual currents of the time. So I think I need to finish now. I'm going to skip out a little bit, but you're welcome to ask me questions on it. Here's some examples. Here we go with this. In conclusion, the recognition that Yiddish theatre was able to navigate this seemingly impossible route across the forbidden straits of Greek mythology, Greek divine and theatre, to create a popular and accepted play in its own Yiddish-speaking community is not a given. Acknowledging the desire of the enlightened Yiddishists to produce a play from the greats of Aeschylus, Sophocles, or Euripides, and that the playwrights were able to do so successfully, offers case study, which must have bearing on other adaptations within reception literature. For while Yiddish theatre is considered a niche topic, it's well placed within its microculture as a model for reception studies. The reception of Greek myths and the adaptation of Greek divinities within Yiddish theatre shows it to be an example of classical reception, which is relatively tight-knit. There's a pattern of mimesis which is upheld throughout all the literature, and the limits are acknowledged. While the realm of Yiddish literature situated in Jewish socio-religious morality seems to be at loggerheads with these other ethical universes, as Davies calls it, of Greco-Roman mythology, this paper has endeavored to show how Elkin at least demonstrated how is it possible to maneuver between the two while strengthening the message of both. Elkin's Oedipus is a case study of the larger socio-historical needs of the time, reflecting a community's viewing needs with the power of Sophocles' Oedipus, what Freud called the greatest tragedy ever written, and its adaptability. There I'll stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.